Have you ever stopped to think about the power a secret can hold in someone's life? Sometimes, what's hidden right under your nose can turn your world upside down. Imagine, for a moment, being a millionaire accustomed to absolute control, everything planned, everything calculated, down to the last detail. And suddenly, a discovery about the most unlikely person, your maid, flips your universe on its head. But we're not talking about just any secret, we're talking about something that involves love, sacrifice, and breathtaking twists. Eduardo never imagined that Isabella, so discreet in her position, was hiding something so powerful. But what could it be? A betrayal? A crime? Or perhaps something that would challenge everything he believed about himself, about life, and about what truly matters. His shock was so profound that the certainties he carried shattered into pieces. And you? Would you be able to handle a revelation that put your values to the test? Stay with me, because this story isn't just about secrets. It's about transformation, about how life can surprise us and force us to rethink everything. And who knows, in the midst of this tale, you might find answers to your own dilemmas. The journey is just beginning. Isabella would wake up before dawn, as if she already knew the battle began early. Between preparing breakfast for little Joao and organizing the house, she would carve out a sliver of time to think about the future. The television, playing in the background, displayed commercials for a life far removed from her reality. Will I ever be able to provide all this for my son? She wondered. But she quickly brushed the thought aside, replacing dreams with concrete plans. Working as a maid in a luxurious mansion brought daily lessons. Isabella observed the details of Eduardo's millionaire routine, her employer, and marveled at how such different values could coexist under the same roof. While cleaning marble floors and arranging collections of expensive watches, she often asked herself, how could something so dazzling feel so empty? It was a stark contrast to her home life, where Joao's simple smile was her greatest treasure. Even so, balancing work and motherhood was no easy feat. Some nights, she would collapse onto the sofa, exhausted, while Joao slept to the hum of the television. Her heart would ache as she remembered the birthday she couldn't celebrate or the school meeting she had to miss. In those moments, Isabella clung to the belief that today's sacrifices were the bridge to the future she dreamed of. Interestingly, it was the little things that kept Isabella going. Joao scribbled notes saying "I love you, Mom," or an unexpected compliment from Dona Clotilde, the housekeeper, made it all feel worthwhile. If you don't nurture your inner strength, who else will? She often told herself. That phrase stayed with her like a mantra, reminding her that no matter how heavy the burden, she was capable of carrying it. One day, while cleaning Eduardo's office, Isabella came across a document left on the desk. Curious, she glanced at it and nearly fell over. It was a contract for the sale of a company worth millions, but it concealed a dark secret. Does he even know what he's signing? She wondered. That discovery would mark the beginning of a whirlwind that would change everything. Despite her challenges, Isabella always found time to teach values to her son. Joao, it doesn't matter how much money someone has, what truly counts is their heart, she would say as she helped him with his homework. Small acts, like sharing his snack with a classmate who had none, were encouraged. Deep down, Isabella knew she was raising a strong and generous man. Meanwhile, Eduardo barely noticed Isabella's presence. To him, life was a blur of meetings, negotiations, and evenings in front of the television. Yet, the choices he made without realizing it would ultimately intertwine their fates in an irreversible way. After all, in a world where secrets are worth their weight in gold, what happens when they come to light? Eduardo lived surrounded by luxury, paintings by renowned artists, crystal chandeliers, and dinners served on fine porcelain. Yet, the mansion seemed to echo the silence of his solitude. In contrast, Isabella, with her simple life, knew how to find joy in a plate of rice and beans shared with Joao. It was as if the glimmer of gold could not fill Eduardo's emptiness, while Isabella radiated warmth with so little. One day, after returning from a meeting, Eduardo found Isabella playing with Joao in the mansion's garden. She had improvised a cardboard castle, and the boy was laughing as if he were at an amusement park. The scene disarmed him. How can something so simple bring so much happiness? He wondered, almost unable to grasp that such moments were more valuable than any artwork in his collection. For Eduardo, etiquette and business rules were unquestionable pillars, but Isabella viewed life differently. During a casual conversation in the kitchen, she mentioned helping João donate clothes he no longer used. Eduardo, intrigued, reflected on his own habit of buying things he never used. It was the first time he had paused to consider the waste his wealth enabled. There was also something unsettling about Isabella's honesty. One day, while cleaning the office, she found a gold bracelet on the floor and returned it without hesitation. Eduardo, accustomed to mistrusting everyone around him, was surprised. In that moment, he realized dignity did not depend on status or possessions. It was a lesson he never expected to learn from someone so simple. But their interactions were not always harmonious. Eduardo was critical and demanding, pointing out flaws even in the smallest imperfections. Once, he reprimanded Isabella for a detail in the living room's arrangement. She, however, remained calm, responding with firmness and politeness. "Everything here is beautiful on the outside, but what about the inside?" she murmured to herself as she returned to work. The phrase echoed in Eduardo's mind, though he didn't fully understand why. Small gestures began to bring them closer. One day, Isabella brought a homemade cake she had baked for João into the kitchen. When Eduardo tasted a slice, he felt the flavor of a childhood long forgotten. It was something simple but filled with meaning. He realized that true wealth might lie in moments that money could never buy. Over time, Eduardo began to notice how Isabella's simplicity filled spaces he didn't even know were empty. While the luxury around him seemed to lose its luster, something inside him began to shift. Yet there was something he couldn't quite explain, a connection that intrigued him and made him see her in a different light. But what if the secret she carried was bigger than he ever imagined? Heitor, Eduardo's son, had everything money could buy: high-tech toys, a bedroom larger than the living rooms of many homes, and vacations that would make any child envious. Yet, his eyes carried a sadness that even the most expensive gifts couldn't erase. He spent hours in front of the television, almost always alone, while Eduardo was tied up in meetings or social commitments. What no one realized was that Heitor longed for something no amount of money could buy: companionship. One overcast afternoon, Isabella found Heitor curled up in the corner of the garden, clutching a teddy bear. He looked so small against the vastness of the mansion. With her maternal sensitivity, she approached him gently, careful not to intrude, and started a conversation. "Have you ever imagined how many adventures can fit into a garden like this?" she said, holding up a fallen leaf that resembled a ship's sail. Heitor smiled shyly, and in that moment, something shifted. From that day on, Isabella became more than just a maid. She became an unexpected friend to Heitor. Together, they created incredible stories with simple materials: cardboard castles, paper swords, and adventures that existed only in their imaginations. The boy, once glued to the television, now ran through the garden, laughing like never before. To him, Isabella represented something he had never experienced so genuinely: love and attention. While Eduardo saw Isabella as merely invisible, Heitor viewed her as a hero. During a formal dinner, Eduardo noticed how much more talkative and cheerful his son had become, something rare for him. He asked, "What's been making you so happy, Heitor?" The response came quickly: "Aunt Isabella taught me how to make a dragon out of leaves. She's amazing." Eduardo fell silent, feeling a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Despite the growing bond between Isabella and Heitor, tension lingered in the air. Eduardo, though grateful for the change in his son, began to wonder if their relationship was crossing professional boundaries. One day, he found the two in the middle of a battle with paper swords and couldn't hide his irritation. "This isn't the place for playing," he said, unaware of how much those words hurt both Heitor and Isabella. But it was precisely Isabella's spontaneity that gave Heitor something he had never had with his father: a space to be himself. In an honest conversation, she encouraged him to open up about his feelings, something Eduardo never did. "It's okay to miss him, Heitor. Maybe you can tell him that," she suggested. The boy nodded, but his expression showed how difficult that still was for him. While Eduardo remained immersed in his world of business, he failed to see that something crucial was unfolding. Isabella wasn't just helping Heitor overcome his loneliness, she was becoming an essential figure in his life. But what would happen when secrets were revealed, and the connections between them were tested to their limits? The relationship between Eduardo and Isabella began to sour on an otherwise ordinary day. Arriving home earlier than usual, Eduardo stumbled upon a scene that, to him, seemed suspicious. Isabella was in the office with Heitor, flipping through an old family book. Without giving her a chance to explain, he accused her of overstepping her boundaries. "Who gave you permission to be here?" he asked coldly. Isabella tried to explain, but her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Eduardo's distrust was like a stone cast into a calm lake, creating ripples that affected everyone around. Heitor, who witnessed the scene, was in shock. "Dad, it wasn't her fault," he tried to argue. But Eduardo was unyielding. In that moment, Isabella realized that, no matter how much she had done for the boy, her place in the house was precarious, dictated by the unforgiving gaze of her employer. The tension culminated in an abrupt decision. Eduardo demanded that Isabella leave the house. He claimed it was to protect his son and their privacy. As she packed her things, Heitor cried, clinging to her as if her departure marked the end of the world. "I'll come back, my dear. I'll never forget you," she said, tears streaming down her face. But deep down, she knew this might be a final goodbye. Isabella's departure had immediate consequences. Heitor withdrew into his shell, refusing to speak to Eduardo. The television became his sole companion again, but now he watched in silence, without interest. Eduardo, too proud to admit it, began to realize that something essential had changed in the household dynamic. The emptiness felt even greater, echoing his rash decision. Eduardo tried to justify his actions, telling himself he was protecting Heitor. But one night, as he passed by his son's room, he heard muffled sobs. Opening the door, he saw Heitor clutching the teddy bear Isabella had given him, whispering, "Why did she have to go?" The sight hit Eduardo like a punch to the stomach. For the first time, he began to question whether he had made an irreparable mistake. Without Isabella, Eduardo missed not only the care she gave to Heitor, but also the presence that had filled the mansion's emptiness. He began to notice details he had previously overlooked, the laughter that once echoed through the garden, the simple yet flavorful meals she had prepared. More than anything, he missed the authenticity she brought to every action. Something inside him was beginning to shift, though he still didn't know how to handle it. As Eduardo grappled with the consequences of his decision, Isabella was facing her own struggles. Now, far from the mansion, she had to rebuild her life. Yet, the secret she carried, the one Eduardo knew nothing about, continued to haunt her. What if he ever found out? The question lingered in her mind, leaving open the possibility of a future encounter. It took just a moment for everything to change. Heitor, still reeling from Isabella's departure, became more withdrawn than ever. In a moment of distraction, while playing unsupervised in the garden, an unexpected accident occurred. He fell from a high structure and suffered a serious injury. Eduardo was called urgently and, upon arriving at the hospital, felt his world crumble as he saw his son unconscious. What if I had been more present? The thought echoed like a silent scream. The silence in the hospital room was suffocating. Eduardo, who had always found security in his decisions, now felt lost. He spent hours by Heitor's side, holding his small hand and pleading for a chance to make things right. It was in this moment of vulnerability that something unexpected happened. Isabella appeared. Upon hearing about the accident, she didn't think twice before going to the hospital. "I needed to be here," she said, without waiting for permission. Eduardo, torn between pride and relief, initially reacted coldly. "You think you can just come back like this?" he asked, though his voice betrayed his emotions. Isabella stood her ground. "This isn't about you or me. It's about him," she replied, gesturing toward little Heitor. Her presence there was undeniably necessary, and Eduardo, though hesitant, allowed her to stay. In the days that followed, Isabella brought a calmness that Eduardo couldn't provide. She sang to Heitor, held his hand, and encouraged him even in silence. The medical team noticed subtle improvements in the boy, as if his strength were tied to Isabella's presence. Eduardo, watching from a distance, began to reflect on the true nature of love and care. "She's doing for him what I couldn't," he admitted to himself. In a moment of confession, Eduardo opened up to Isabella about something he had never told anyone. "I always thought money would fix everything, but now I see. He doesn't need things, he needs me. And I failed." Isabella, with her practical wisdom, responded, "There's still time. What matters is what you do from now on." That conversation marked the beginning of a transformation in Eduardo, who was starting to see life through new eyes. Finally, a turning point brought relief. Heitor opened his eyes. His first word was a whisper, "Aunt Isabella." Eduardo, overwhelmed with emotion, held back tears but knew that moment was more than gratitude, it was a call to change. He approached his son and promised, "I'll be better for you, for us." The promise, made through tears, was a significant step, but he knew it would take much more than words to regain Heitor's trust. Eduardo not only recognized the need to change, but also felt that Isabella was an essential part of this new journey. However, one thing still unsettled him: what else was she hiding? As the hospital returned to its routine, Eduardo and Isabella seemed to enter a new chapter, marked by both hope and uncertainty. But what would the days ahead reveal? After Heitor's recovery, the relationship between Eduardo and Isabella took an unexpected turn. Eduardo, who had always maintained unshakable pride, found himself faced with the need to ask for forgiveness. It wasn't easy for him to admit his mistakes, but watching Isabella playing with Heitor in the hospital, he realized how unfair he had been. In a moment of courage, he approached her. "I was cruel to you. Can you forgive me?" he said, his eyes filled with regret. Isabella, for her part, felt a whirlwind of emotions. Forgiving Eduardo meant letting go of the pain he had caused, but she also saw it as an opportunity to rebuild something for Heitor's sake. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, Eduardo, but it can create a better future," she replied. Her voice was firm, but her gaze carried the tenderness that always defined her. That moment marked the beginning of a reconnection, not just between them, but between Eduardo and himself. As Heitor recovered, the dynamic in the house changed completely. Eduardo, now more present, began participating in simple activities with his son. He helped with homework and even joined in games in the garden, something unthinkable just months earlier. Watching from a distance, Isabella felt that her efforts were bearing fruit. "It's not about perfection, but about genuinely trying," she thought as she watched Eduardo and Heitor laughing together. Forgiveness also demanded that Eduardo change in other ways. He began to reevaluate his priorities and values. Endless meetings were replaced with family lunches, and business matters carried less weight than spending time with Heitor. "Sometimes, you have to lose something to understand what truly matters," he told Isabella during one such moment. She knew Eduardo still had much to learn, but this was a significant step. One evening, during dinner, Eduardo did something unexpected. He looked at Isabella and, with rare sincerity, said, "You're not just important to Heitor. You're important to this family." The room fell silent for a few seconds, only to be broken by Heitor's smile as he said, "She's always been part of our family." Eduardo realized those words carried a truth he had been slow to see. The power of forgiveness began to transform not only Eduardo but also the mansion itself. What had once been a cold, calculated space was now filled with laughter, conversations, and simple yet genuine moments. Isabella, who had always valued human warmth, saw this as proof that change was possible. "It's not about where you live, but how you live," she thought while helping Heitor put together a puzzle in the living room. However, the newfound harmony was still vulnerable to a secret tightly guarded by Isabella. She knew that, sooner or later, Eduardo would need to learn the truth she was hiding. And while he now saw her as a pillar of stability and love, she wondered, will he understand when he finds out? The answer seemed to lie in the near future, where the pieces of the past would finally come together. The mansion, which had once resembled more of a museum than a home, began to change in subtle ways. Eduardo, inspired by Isabella's presence and his evolving relationship with Heitor, decided to transform the space. Extravagant and meaningless objects were replaced by elements that told stories. Family photos began to fill the once empty walls. For the first time, the place started to feel like a true home. The kitchen, once a silent space used only by staff, became the heart of the house. Isabella led impromptu gatherings, preparing simple recipes that evoked memories of her childhood. Eduardo, who barely knew how to fry an egg, began to join in, albeit awkwardly. "It's not about what we cook, it's about being together," she would say as Heitor laughed at his father's clumsy attempts. It was a type of connection that money could never buy. Heitor thrived in this new environment. He began inviting friends over to play, something he had never done before. The mansion, once cold and empty, now echoed with laughter and the sound of children running through its corridors. Watching his son, Eduardo realized the profound impact of the changes. Maybe the secret to happiness lies in simplicity, he thought, recalling Isabella's words. The transformation was not just physical but emotional. Despite the progress, the secret Isabella carried hung over her like a shadow. Each day, the need to reveal the truth grew more pressing. Eduardo noticed a change in her demeanor but chose not to press. He understood that whatever burden she bore, it would need to be faced with patience and maturity. What he didn't know was that this secret had the potential to redefine everything they had built together. The changes in the house also brought a transformation in Eduardo. He began shedding his image as a cold and calculating businessman, becoming a more compassionate man. At a dinner he organized for close friends and family, he surprised everyone by publicly thanking Isabella. "You didn't just bring warmth to this house, you brought it to life," he said, bringing tears to her eyes. The words, though simple, carried an emotional weight he had never shown before. Even the mansion staff began to notice the changes. Once rigid and formal, they now shared relaxed moments with the family. One day, as Eduardo played with Heitor in the pool, Dona Clotilde, the housekeeper, remarked to Isabella, "I never thought I'd see this. He's a new man." Isabella smiled, but in her heart, she knew the true test was yet to come. The mansion had finally become what it was always meant to be, a home. Yet, as Eduardo and Heitor embraced this new chapter, Isabella knew the time to reveal her secret was drawing near. She took a deep breath and, in silence, resolved that she could no longer delay. The truth always finds its way, she thought. And with that, she opened the door to a new chapter that would define all their futures. And now, what will you do with everything you've just learned? This story has shown that life can surprise us in unexpected ways, that forgiveness is a transformative force, and that the biggest secrets can be the key to a new beginning. Are you ready to look around and truly see what matters most? Is it time to rethink your priorities, your relationships, or even what you define as success? Think about this. What secrets of your own heart have you been hiding from yourself? What changes are waiting for you to take that first courageous step? After all, transformation begins when you decide to act. And speaking of action, why not share this newfound knowledge with others? Take the next step, apply what you've learned, inspire someone, and start transforming your own story. Oh, and before you go, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any content that could change your perspective and perhaps your life. The journey is just beginning, and I want to walk alongside you in this quest for wisdom and inspiration. See you soon.